Hello and welcome to another video lab together with you and me, Miss K. All right, so you need, before we start, to have your video lab handout ready to go because we're going to fill out some stuff together during the lab, but then that's what you're finishing. And just to clarify, this, if you are watching this video for Miss Killinan's Chemistry A class, you are filling out this as your lab report. You do not have to do a separate from scratch lab report just because of all of the data that's already loaded on here. I don't want you to have to retype all of that. So make sure you have this handout ready to go. If not, pause the video, come back when you're ready. So the first thing it talks about is that you will need to at some point write a title. Actually, even let me go back to that. You need to fill in the date. So as a chemist, writing down the date that you took data is kind of what our norm is, because some labs, depending on the day you take the data, it could affect your results. So that's why that date is important. The lab title should be pretty much basically when you're done with the lab, you go back and think, okay, in one sentence, how could I kind of summarize this lab? Usually it starts with an action word. So identifying, mixing, showing, something like that might work for this lab. But precipitate lab, not a good lab title. That is a good document title, but not a good lab experiment title. You can see that the lab EQ is already set up for you. So what are examples of precipitates that form from mixing two ionic solutions? So that's the chemistry that we're going to be doing, precipitates. Remember, that has to do with chemical change. So you could talk about that at some point, how identity will be changing into something new. We call it a precipitate. And we're going to actually be able to write the formulas for the stuff we start with and the stuff that we make. In order to do that, though, there's a little bit of chemistry background I want to do together. So we're going to do some pre-lab information to get started. So when we mix ionic solutions, technically there's three things that can happen. One, you mix stuff together and everything stays soluble. Okay, pause. Is that a word you already know? If not, jot down at the end here, add some notes to your lab. Soluble means everything stays mixed together, dissolved, like a homogeneous mixture. Everything is mixed, but you don't see the individual pieces. That's what soluble means. So that's one option. All right, that's not very interesting. So we're not going to do that example. Another option is that they mix together and something new forms, but then that new thing is still soluble. So again, there's that word again. So soluble, everything is staying mixed together. It's a solution, a homogeneous mixture. No precipitates, not interesting. Well, then that's our third option. So that's what we're going to be showing today. When two ionic solutions mix together, they go through a chemical change and they produce a precipitate. And that precipitate is an insoluble compound. So just a review. So if soluble means everything stays dissolved, homogeneous mixture, insoluble now means it does not dissolve. It doesn't mix in perfectly, so we would really create a heterogeneous mixture. So already I'm giving you some hints about the kinds of things you'll be talking about in your conclusion. Things like precipitates, heterogeneous mixture, chemical change, those kinds of things. Okay, so that's the pre-lab sort of back information you need to know, is that we're going to be doing a lab activity where when you mix the ionic solutions, you do create an insoluble compound called a precipitate. All right, so we're going to fill in this first part together. I'm actually not going to do this one, so I'm just going to show you what the steps will be. So when the ions come together, they can switch partners and create something new that is a precipitate. That's what we're going to be showing. So like here where it says, okay, so the name is sodium sulfide. Well, sodium sulfide is made up of two ions. We know this because of work that we've already done. So we would look up the symbol for sodium, so you could have your periodic table out. The symbol for sodium is Na, so you could find that on the periodic table. But then we can find the oxidation number. It's charged because look at where it is. It's on the first column on the left. So if it goes backwards one, it will be in the noble gas column. So we would say that sodium has a +1 charge, Na +1. Sulfide is the other ion that's going to be involved when we mix them together. Sulfide is just the bonded version of sulfur. So we need to look up the symbol for sulfur, so find it on the periodic table. It's an S, capital S, and then look at where it is on the periodic table. If it moves forward 2 spots, it will be in the noble gas column. So that means it has a -2 charge, more negative than it was before because it gained electrons. So there is my second ion that is present. The third ion comes from the first word of the second compound that I mixed together, lead, and then it gives you that Roman numeral 2. Remember, that Roman numeral is telling you what oxidation number it is. So it's Pb for lead, and then a +2. And I knew it was a +2 because of that Roman numeral 2. And then it says it's bonding to nitrate. Remember that 8 ending means, look at your ion guide sheet, and you just copy it off of there. So if you look it up, NO3 minus 1. So NO3 minus 1. So that is nitrate. All right. So it says that the ions are going to switch partners. So think of it this way. Sodium and sulfur used to be partners, and Pb and NO3 used to be partners. When they switch, the opposites will attract. So Na will now be attracted to NO3. Pb will be attracted to S because they're opposite charges. So what we can do then is we can figure out the formula of the new compounds. It does also ask you to write the formula for the starting compound. So let's actually do that first. I got ahead of myself. I was excited about the precipitate. Na is a +1, S is a -2. So if I have 2 of this whole thing, you'll have +2 to balance out that -2. So the first compound formula would be Na2 with a capital S. So that's my first compound that I'm starting with. The second compound also has a +2 for Pb, but then a -1 for NO3. So I need 2 of this whole thing because 2 times -1 is -2, which will balance out the +2 for lead. But this is a group, so don't forget, what do you need around it? Yep, parentheses. So I'm going to put Pb and then NO3 in parentheses, and then a 2 on the outside of the parentheses. So those are my 2 starting compounds. So when we do our lab, when we get started here pretty soon, because remember, this is still pre-lab stuff, that's what you're going to do first. What are the 4 ions? And you get the ions from the names. Sodium was your first ion, sulfide was your second ion, lead 2 was your first ion, nitrate was your second ion for, well, third and fourth ions. Then you write the formula that you started with, and then now we do that switching thing where opposites attract. So sodium is not going to be attracted to sulfur anymore. Sodium is going to attract to NO3. S is not going to be attracted to sodium anymore. S is going to be attracted to Pb. And then we can write our new formula. So now we're comparing Na +1 and NO3 -1. Perfect match. They're just going to go together. Okay, so Na, NO3. So there is your perfect match. That's one of the new compounds. The other new compound is sulfur and Pb, but we always write the positive ion first. That's not a Killian rule, that's a chemistry rule. So always put the positive piece first. So we're going to put Pb connected to S. Perfect match, just one of each of them. And it ends up being PBS. Oh, the TV station. All right, PBS. So those are the 2 compounds. So then the next question will be, one of them stays soluble. And remember, soluble means it's all mixed in. We don't see the individual pieces, but the other one will be the precipitate. And it will be insoluble, meaning it cannot dissolve. It cannot mix in perfectly. Well, here's one of the hints that you're going to know. Look at what it says down here. Nitrates are always soluble. Think about what that means. Does that mean they'll always form a precipitate or never form a precipitate? Think what soluble means. Okay, so a nitrate compound will never form the precipitate. So this was a nitrate compound, NO3. So that means that NO3 is always soluble. So that means that the NaNO3 stays soluble. We cannot see it. So NaNO3 stays soluble and we don't see it. And then that means the other thing would be our precipitate, PBS. So PBS forms a precipitate because it is insoluble, meaning it cannot dissolve in water. So those steps are what you're going to do for each of the precipitates that I do in the lab. The only thing that would be missing is that we would also have a place where we describe the precipitate. But for this one, I just wanted you to practice the steps. So that is your pre-lab information. Now we're ready to get started on the lab. Okay, so now you're ready to start taking data. What you can see is I have a close-up on something called a well plate. A well plate has, well, it's like a plate that has little wells in it where I can mix the chemicals together. The chemicals are over here in, well, actually, I'll show you here. The chemicals are in little dropper bottles and they're labeled so that I can use those to show you the different precipitates. So again, you're following along on your lab handout and we're gonna mix the chemicals that it says. And then at some point you will either pause the video and do those things that we did in the pre-lab, the 4 ions, write the compound, switch the partners, write the new compound, Anything with NO3 is always soluble. The other compound will be your precipitate. And then you'll describe the precipitate. Okay, I'm going to stand up. You won't see me anymore. Okay, so here we go. So this is our well plate so that you can see what's going on. We're doing reaction number 1, which is copper nitrate. So here's copper nitrate and potassium chromate. Potassium chromate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix 2 to 3 drops in each little well. And then we'll be able to see what happens. So like 1, 2, 3. So there we go. And then 1, 2, 3. Okay. Definitely we're going to call that a precipitate. Look at how it looks like thick and kind of chalky. And it's kind of like a mustardy yellow. So that's what you put in the blank where it says describe the precipitate. So like, you know, thick mustard or chalky yellow, like dark yellow, like something like that. That's your precipitate. So then you're also going to do the thing where you write out the 4 ions. So one of the ions would be potassium, another ion would be chromate, and then you'll have copper and nitrate. So those are your 4 ions. You would write out their symbols and charges, put them together to write the formula for potassium chromate and the formula for copper 2 nitrate. You see the precipitate. When they switch partners, the one that is NO3 is soluble. It doesn't form a precipitate. The one that is not with NO3 is insoluble. That is your precipitate. Okay? So there you can see it. And then as you look at it a little bit closer, maybe you notice that it's getting kind of like yellowy red even a little bit. So that's something that's kind of interesting. Sometimes the reactions take a little bit longer because all the particles need more time to mix together. So that's kind of an interesting one. All right, that was reaction number 1. Let's do reaction number 2. Reaction number 2 needs lead 2 nitrate and potassium iodide. All right, I'm going to do the same thing, 2 to 3 drops. So I'm going to put this one, I'll just put it right next to it. So there's my 2 to 3 drops of, this happens to be potassium iodide. So there's 2 of your ions, potassium and iodine. And here is my other one. Check it out. Look at it. Okay, so definitely, again, a precipitate, chemical change, new identity that looks thicker, precipitate, and this bright yellow color. And look at this one. See how this changed? It's definitely like a reddish color now. And then this one is for sure yellow, but that thick. So describing the precipitate, this is what it looks like. Okay, so your 4 ions are lead 2, nitrate, potassium, and iodide. And then you will write that formula, and then you'll switch the partners. So you've got a new positive with the new negative, a new positive with a new negative for your new compounds. And again, nitrates are always soluble. So in your new compounds, the one with NO3 is not the precipitate. That's the one that stays soluble. All right, we're doing reaction number 3. I got to move my pages here. Reaction number 3 is between lead 2 nitrate again, and then this time, sodium sulfide. All right, so let's get our couple drops of lead 2 nitrate. Okay, so there's our lead 2 nitrate, just clear little drops. And then here is our sodium sulfide. Look at that one. Okay, so that one, as you can see here, can you just make sure that you can see it? So this one is like a really like thick white. So you started with 2 clear things, and now we have this like really thick white kind of looking thing. Another thing we sometimes do is we put like paper underneath it, and then see how like I can't read through this like white stuff. That's another way we know that it's insoluble. Like I can't see through it anymore. So that's another trick chemists sometimes use to tell whether or not something is a precipitate. So lead 2 nitrate and sodium sulfide mix, they form something new, a precipitate. Describe the precipitate, you'll write out the 4 ions, and then figure out what the new compounds are. All right, okay, we're on number 4. This one is silver nitrate and potassium chromate. Okay, so silver nitrate, it looks like the bottle has been tinted because silver nitrate starts to break apart if it gets too much light. So you'll see that the actual silver nitrate is clear. So you got your clear little dots here, and then we've got this yellowish potassium chromate. So that was silver nitrate. This is potassium chromate. Look at that one. Okay, so that one looks similar to this, only this one happened right away. There is no hint of yellow left behind. It's like blood or brick red almost, where this is still kind of like a brownish red with a little bit of yellow on the side, but we've got this like bright, well, darkish, bright red, sort of like maroon almost. So that's the precipitate, the color that you see. Your 4 ions are potassium and chromate, silver, and nitrate. So those are your 4 ions. Write the original formula, switch the partners, and then you write the new compound. The new compound that is with NO3 is soluble because nitrates are always soluble. The other compound that's not with NO3, the new ones, that is your precipitate. All right, we are on number 5. Is this our last one? Yeah, it is. Okay, so we've got calcium nitrate this time and sodium carbonate. All right, so calcium nitrate, clearish. So 3 little drops there. So there's our precipitate, or there's our first solution, calcium nitrate. And then we've got a little bit of sodium carbonate. Okay, so this one you can see, so let me hold it up a little bit there. So this one you can see is still white, but see how it's different than this one, where this one is like very like opaque. This one is more marbly, just showing you like a little bit of difference between those precipitates when we're, identifying them, but definitely looks a little bit different. So what you saw here is 5 different precipitates from different solutions that we started with. And the point of this was to see, well, what kinds of precipitates can form. So here's 5 different examples. And so then now that you've you've seen them, you're going to be writing their formulas, deciding which one is the precipitate and which one is not. So you're reviewing precipitate, soluble, insoluble, writing formulas, chemical changes, homogeneous mixture versus heterogeneous mixture. These all started, so if you look at them, they all start as homogeneous mixtures. So all of these solutions start as homogeneous mixtures, and then some of them make, depending on what you mix together, some of them make heterogeneous mixtures when they make that precipitate. So those are all the different kinds of things that we reviewed. Okay, so now you've seen some different precipitates, saw some different solutions, practiced some writing formulas and identifying precipitates. Now it's time to write your CER conclusion. So remember, the claim should answer your EQ. The evidence will be refer to actual things you wrote down in your data table. So chemical formulas, colors of precipitates, those kinds of things. And then the reasoning, think of it this way. What chemistry concepts do I know that would help explain the fact that I got the evidence that I wrote down? And if you need it, go back and watch the video again. I told you about a whole bunch of different chemistry concepts you can be using to help you write that reasoning section. All right, thanks so much for being my partner today for our video lab. See you later.